We're here at the 28th Annual Alzheimer's Regional Conference here in Seattle, Washington. Joining us today is the keynote speaker. He's the president and co-founder of the Hearthstone Alzheimer's Care and the I'm Still Here Foundation. He holds a PhD in sociology from Columbia University. He's taught at Harvard, Yale, and McGill Universities and serves on committees both nationally and internationally. Dr. JohnZeisel. Dr. Zeisel, thank you so much for taking time out today and joining us.
Thank you, Josh.
Dr. Zeisel, I've heard you say that you're committed to giving people with dementia a life worth living. What do you mean by that?
Well, we all deserve a life worth living. And what it means is that if we find people who are locked up at home or lock themselves up at home because they're embarrassed to go out, they don't have a full life. If there's no place in society to go, in the community to go, because it's confusing to get into the movie theater, and if you act strange, they're going to say, well, we can't let you in. Or if you're going to church or synagogue or temple or mosque, and the religious leader says, well, you know, we don't want anybody out here who's going to disrupt things, then you can't have that part of your life. So whether it's a spiritual, whether it's a cultural, whether it's a sports event, if they're not planned in a way that somebody with dementia can enjoy it without being lost, without being frightened, without becoming agitated, they end up staying in their nursing home, staying in their assisted living, staying in their home. That's not a life worth living. So what I mean by a life worth living is full social involvement and a quality of life, but also the human right of being part of society.
I've heard you talk about it takes a hopeful village.
Yes.
Is that what you're talking about when you say the person that wants to go to synagogue or temple or church, or having the community at large involved and aware that there are people with these issues, but they're still people?
Absolutely. And so when I say it takes a village, obviously Hillary Clinton used it for children raising a child. You can't do these things alone. Raising a child is a very complex thing.
Yes.
And people who try to do it on their own, as I did, we don't always do it right. Well, it's the same thing with dementia. It's a complex condition that gets people each individually to respond differently, and we need each other's help in doing it. So when I talk about we need a village, we got to get people out of their homes into the community, and the community needs to be coordinated. The museum has to work with the movie theater, has to work with the parks department for the walking program, has to work with the market so that on market day there's a place where people can meet. And once you have all of these community and cultural venues working together, you actually have a safety net. And that safety net means people aren't going to get lost, people aren't going to get upset, people are not, all the symptoms that people associate with dementia, that aren't really symptoms, by the way, go away. And then there's no Alzheimer's, there's no dementia in the room during those programs. That's what It Takes a Village does.
In the past, and I'm certainly no expert at all, I'm
Sure.
ignorant of the subject, in fact, it seems that there's always been a pharmacological approach, and let's give this person drugs and be done with it, frankly. You're promoting something very different.
Yes, I am.
You're trying to change a cultural bias, I would call it.
It's a cultural bias not only about dementia, it's a cultural bias in our society.
Mm-hmm.
So if somebody is sneezing because there's too much pollen in the air, they go, I better go get a pill, not I better find a different place to go that doesn't have pollen in the air. I have to, or wear a mask, or whatever it is that we could do that isn't taking a medication. So with dementia, there are three kinds of drugs. The first kind of drug is the drug for arthritis or an anxiety drug if you're really worried all the time. And those make sense to take. It's just a health drug. The other are what's called antipsychotics. Now that's the drug that's been overused. So-and-so is upset by something. It's not his fault, but they're upset because his wife is screaming at him all the time. Why are you keeping on saying the same thing? So he gets very upset. Well, one thing we can do is give you an antipsychotic. What that does is take you out of life. That's why people in many nursing homes are sitting around like this all the time. And I can tell. So that kind of drug, in fact, is now increasingly and publicly being reduced, and there's policies against using antipsychotics. And the third are the drugs that are supposed to help people with dementia, cholinesterase inhibitors, etc. It turns out that those help a few people, not all, and many have side effects with it, and others it doesn't help at all, and they have side effects. So while some of those medications help, and you have to use the right ones, every condition we have actually uses what I call non-pharmacologic approaches. So if you have a bad knee, you take an aspirin or a Tylenol, and it helps your knee, but you also wear a brace.
Yes.
If you are in a wheelchair, you can do physical therapy, but a ramp wouldn't help. Wouldn't hurt to have a ramp. So everything is a combination of the two, and I push against you're right, against the cultural trend to say everything can be solved with a pill, and it can't be.
It seems to me, I've been in and out of adult family homes, visiting people from time to time.
Sure.
And a lot of times, it feels like, and I can't say for sure, that people with Alzheimer's feel a sense of shame about the disease that they have.
The shame and stigma that surrounds this condition, which is a condition that can last, and generally does last, over a decade, drives people underground and drives families to say, well, we're not going to talk about that, because because of the public stigma. Because it's shameful to say, well, we've got that in our family, and dad can't, and there's a lot of can't and can't. So the stigma and the shame leads people to not have contact with their loved one, to not go to the museum, to not go to the movies, to not go out, and if you don't go out, you end up being almost imprisoned in your own home. And that's the downward spiral. It's like a vicious cycle and downward spiral, and you can't stop it. And the only antidote to that is to realize that with creativity and curiosity, we can figure something out to get you involved in life.
You can almost immediately tell the effect that it has on somebody when you get them engaged with art, with music.
That's right.
When you engage them, besides trying to tell them, they're wrong about something.
So instead of telling them they're wrong, you have to give them the opportunity to express their creativity. Mm-hmm. And the issue is that when you say, we know it's right, we know it's right instinctively. We know it's right because we can see in the person's eyes that they're waking up. That doesn't change with policy in Washington. What changes policy in Washington is hard research, and that takes money. So a lot of what I do is try to make sure that we have funding for research on these kinds of interventions, so we can have the data that prove to people who are looking for data what we already know. And that's an uphill battle, because everybody's fighting for a research dollar. And the question is, do you give it for basic neuroscience research? Do you give it for diagnostic research? Do you give it for a therapeutic? Or do you give it to study these, we call it non-pharmacological, but we also call it eco-psychosocial, environmental, psychological, and social interventions that give people a life worth living and get rid of those symptoms.
And you talked about this a little bit in your is this your newest book, I'm Still Here?
So I'm going to take off the label, it's covering up the title. So the answer is, I'm still here. And I'm still here basically is what we hear from everybody that lives with us. And everybody that I work with who has a dementia, that when they're asked, I want to care for you and I know what you need and I'm going to tell somebody something. So I was in a conversation yesterday with somebody, and her husband was standing right next to him. And he said, my husband this, he that, he this. And I just knew that he was saying, but I'm still here. What about me? And he could talk for himself. So the I'm still here message is that we have to hear the fact and know the fact that people are still there. So anybody who says, my mother doesn't know who I am, my mother doesn't know who she is, it's just nonsense. Everybody does. What we need to do is figure out how to get in touch with them, how to engage them, how to make that contact. And it's the same with everybody, right? Different cultures, different ages. How many parents do you know who say, "Oh, my teenage kid, there's just no talking to him"? Well, learn, figure it out,
Yes.
be creative. Go to a Seattle Supersonics game together, or whatever it is, right? Go to a football game together. Find out what he's interested in, this teenage kid who you can't talk to. And it's the same thing with your parent or your spouse with dementia, which is there's something in common that we have.
Well, Dr. Zeisel, thank you very much for taking the time. I really hope everybody goes out and grabs a copy of your book.
Well, they can not only grab it, but they could buy it. It's in many bookstores, but it's also on Amazon and on Barnes & Noble and all the other digital mechanisms.
Very
Thank you.
well, they should purchase it.
Thanks a lot, Josh.
Thank you.